Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for making the time to join us this evening. My name's Michael. I'm the events coordinator and publicist at Annie Bloom's Books. For those of you who aren't familiar with the store, we're located in Portland, Oregon, in the heart of Multnomah Village. We've been around now for 43 years, and we are still going strong. We're open on weekdays from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. and on weekends from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Our website is always open. You can shop day and night at annieblooms.com. You can go there right now and pick up the author's books at that link I just put in the chat. We would love for you to do that. I know Rachel is available to come in and sign books. So if you have a signature request or a personalization request, please put that in the comments section of your order. Thank you very much. We have just one more event coming up for this event season before we shut it down for the holidays before returning next year. So next Tuesday on November 16th, we have Lewis and Clark College alum Joan Nockels Wilson reading from her memoir, The Book of Timothy, A Sister's Pursuit. That should be an interesting event. I'm going to admit another person here. Welcome, welcome everyone. Tonight, we're delighted to be hosting the launch of Portland author Rachel King's debut novel, People Along the Sand. She is going to be in conversation here with Heather Frese. And after their reading and conversation, there'll be a Q&A at the end. You can feel free to type questions into the chat and I will read them to the authors, or you can click on the little hand icon in the reactions menu that's there at the bottom of the screen and ask a question live on screen if you dare, if you're not in your pajamas or if you're comfortable with your pajamas. Let me tell you about People Along the Sand. It's 1967 in Kalapuya, a town on the Central Oregon coast, and Jackson Ryder decides to build a second story onto his motel. His wife, Marilyn Ryder, doesn't want to take on more debt for an expansion. Their ongoing dispute prompts Marilyn to leave Jackson and stay with her friend Leah Tolman, a bakery owner and advocate for the Beach Bill, the legislation that will make all Oregon beaches public land. While Marilyn becomes an activist, her adolescent son, Tim, befriends an elderly lighthouse keeper, Elliot Yeager, who wants the public to stay off his beach. A novel about the pleasures and limits of solitude for 5 distinct and deeply human characters centered around the passing of the Oregon Beach Bill and published in time for the 55th anniversary of the historic legislation. Rachel King was educated at the University of Oregon and West Virginia University. Her short stories have appeared in One Story, super awesome, North American Review, Green Mountains Review, Northwest Review, and elsewhere. She lives in her hometown of Portland, Oregon. You're in Portland. Let me tell you about Heather's book, The Baddest Girl on the Planet. Evie Austin, native of Hatteras Island, North Carolina, and baddest girl on the planet, has not lived her life in a straight line. There have been several detours, career snafus, bad romantic choices, a loved but unplanned child, not to mention her ill-advised lifelong obsession with boxer Mike Tyson. This is the story of what the baddest girl on the planet must find in herself when a bag of pastries, a new lover, or a quick trip to Vegas won't fix anything, when she must learn from her relationships, but also look within to navigate the decisions and turning points in redefining a new notion of herself. Heather Frese is the author of the novel, The Baddest Girl on the Planet, winner of the Lee Smith Novel Prize. She has published numerous short stories, essays, and the occasional poem. Her work has appeared in Michigan Quarterly Review, the Los Angeles Review, Front Porch, the Barely South Review, Switchback, and elsewhere, earning notable mention in the Pushcart Prize Anthology and Best American Essays. Heather received her MFA from West Virginia University and has a master's degree from Ohio University. Coastal North Carolina is her longtime love and source of inspiration, her writing deeply influenced by the wild magic and history of the Outer Banks. A native Ohioan, she currently writes, edits, and wrangles 3 small children in Raleigh, North Carolina. Everybody, welcome Heather and Rachel.
Yay! Yeah. All right, so this, I guess I'm the one asking the questions tonight. So I'm gonna start off and let you know a little bit about how happy I am to be here tonight to introduce all of you to the debut novel of my dear friend Rachel King. So Rachel and I met during our MFA in fiction in West Virginia, during which time we formed a friendship and also a really kind of productive writing and feedback relationship, which may or may not have involved a good bit of wine, but we were very productive. I've always loved sort of the precision and gentle restraint in Rachel's writing, as well as her vividly evoked settings. And we're kind of going coast to coast here. I tend to write about the East Coast, and Rachel's over there on the West, and I've never been to the Oregon coast, but I left this book deeply feeling it, sort of the dampness and the rocky cliffs and the rolling waves, and just the overall sense of what it feels like to stand on the Pacific coast and how these characters live their lives in that certain place. So I think that's enough for me. Let's let Rachel read, and then we'll talk a little bit, and then y'all can ask questions. Take it to you.
All right. First off, thank you all for coming. I know everyone's a little bit like zoomed out at this point, so I appreciate everyone being here. And what's fun is I know people from across the country, and so it's nice that some of them could come to this. And I'm doing some in-person events later where a lot of you won't be able to come because it's here in Oregon. So yeah, thank you for coming. And thank you for Annie Blooms for hosting us. This is the second time that they've hosted me. I really appreciate their support of local authors. So if you haven't bought the book yet, consider buying it from them or buying Heather's book from them. It's a great book as well. And it is fun to do an event with her as a good friend, and also just the books on the different coasts and the different settings, but that have similarities. So I'm going to read for about 15 minutes. I'm reading about 2/3 of the way through the novel. What you need to know is, as Michael said, Marilyn and Jackson are married. They own a motel called The Wave. They're also separated at this point in the novel. And Marilyn is living with her friend, Leah, whose husband has recently drowned. Tim, Jackson and Marilyn's son, just ran away from home after he found out that a friend of his had died. So right now, Marilyn has returned to The Wave to look for him. Marilyn heard of Tim's disappearance on Monday afternoon. Leah had answered the call from Jackson. Marilyn accepted the phone reluctantly. Maybe Jackson hadn't told Tim about Carl, and she and Jackson would have another confrontation over that. When he told her Tim was missing, she sucked in her breath. For how long, she asked. Jackson clicked his tongue. About 48 hours, I think, he said. About 48 hours, Marilyn repeated. You think? She hadn't forgiven him for that, even after she'd seen his cast and heard the story. He'd been home 12 hours before he noticed Tim's absence, 24 before he worried, and another full day before he called her. All that was unforgivable. They'd alerted the police from Newport to Coos Bay, from Florence to Eugene, and as far as Brookings, Astoria, Salem, and Portland. No one had seen him. Hello, Marilyn. Marilyn looked up. She dropped the dirt from her hand. A tall, heavy-set woman stood at her side. Hello, Clara, she said. How are you? Marilyn brushed her hands together. Fine, she said, just heading on a walk. Enjoy. As Clara smiled, her cheeks dimpled. Marilyn picked up her tea from the windowsill and walked past her. Clara was a pleasant woman, a wealthy doctor, one of their only foreign guests, an annual visitor from England. It was so difficult to talk to the regulars this year. She was headed on a walk. Is that what she said? Well, she better walk then. The noise inside the new units grew louder as she passed them. She brushed her free hand against her skirt and held it up and studied the fingernails. Dirt remained in them. Scratches crisscrossed her palm. She'd been doing yard work for Leah that summer, mowing grass, planting tomato seedlings, trimming the rhododendrons after the flowers wilted, digging up the roots of blackberry bushes encroaching from a neighboring yard. It was the least she could do. Marilyn felt as though she owed Leah so much. Leah, she knew, didn't view it like that. You work, Leah had said, and I pay you. And when Marilyn suggested that Leah might prefer to live alone, Leah had said that she spent enough time alone baking, that she liked to have the option to be around someone while at home. Despite Leah's protests, Marilyn felt her own unsettled life a burden on her friend. Marilyn placed one hand on top of the bench, looked at the ocean and sipped. The low sun shone through patches of clouds that darkened orange and pink rays. Dark blue waves lapped miles out until the earth curved from her line of sight. Her chest ached at the immensity. Tim could be floating out there on a boat. He could be a floating dead body. He could have sunk to the bottom of the sea. She looked away from the water at the bench. Pure speculation, she reminded herself. Tim was smarter than that. The bench had been stained, Marilyn noted. Jackson had kept up on that. For some reason, this pleased her. Tim was missing because she'd left. If this summer had been any other summer, if she'd been working at the Wave and had answered Eileen's phone call, if she'd told Tim the news instead of Jackson, if she provided a comfortable home for her son to grieve in. But maybe the not telling instead of the leaving was the clincher. Maybe she shouldn't have forced that onto Jackson. She'd been thinking of herself, not Tim, when she demanded that of her husband. She'd wanted Jackson to be other than he was. You told him while you were on the dunes? She'd interrupted Jackson as he told the story, not in the car, but during. He looked at her naive. Isn't that what you asked me to do? He asked. In that moment, Marilyn realized that he wasn't going to change. If she explained why During was dangerous, he might understand, but he wouldn't arrive at that conclusion on his own. Marilyn herself should have come to the wave and told her son. A passing middle-aged couple raised their hands, looking altogether too cheery. Agates glittered from the woman's half-open hand. Marilyn walked on south above the rocks. The grass tickled her ankles. For the 100th time, she tried to think where Tim had gone, looking for agates, but he was on the run or hiding out somewhere, not on an afternoon adventure. Maybe while looking for agates, Tim had discovered that cave you could stay overnight in. Maybe he was there. Now that she had a destination, she stopped meandering. She set her mug in a rock crevice, held up her skirt, and glided. Her running posture looked like Tim's. No one could reach their 40s without regrets, Marilyn thought, although to hear Leah speak, you wouldn't think she had any. No, Marilyn corrected herself. Leah regretted drifting away from her dad. She'd wanted to search out her mother's family. Did she regret not having kids? Leah never mentioned it. Marilyn couldn't imagine not regretting that. She wanted at least 2, maybe 3 or 4. Jackson hadn't been opposed. Raising them near the sea had seemed healthier than raising them near a mill. She'd wanted to teach them work by having them help her in the motel. And then after Tim's birth, she couldn't get pregnant again. By the time he was 5, she'd given up. She and Jackson had sex less and less, mainly because of her avoidance. Sex was fine. She enjoyed the pleasure and feeling of closeness. But beside that, what was the point? To her, their family had felt incomplete, but not as incomplete as if they'd never found Tim. Her breath labored, but she kept running. This week, she concentrated only on Tim. She'd stopped worrying about the Nesteca spit and Sandy's finances. She spent hours and too much money driving all over Western Oregon. She prided herself on her work on the beach cause, her freelance accounting, and her thrifty nature, but until Tim was found, she'd suspend all that. All her life, after any major life change or catastrophe, within a day or 2, she'd force herself back to business as usual, but not this time. When she saw the mouth of the cave, she sprinted, wheezing, her hair flying. The uneven rocks hindered her. To take a more direct route, she splashed through shallow tide pools. Seaweed grazed the sides of her sandaled foot. She stubbed her toes on barnacles. They bled. She stood above the cave, looking into the mouth where tiny waves lapped. The tide was coming in. She climbed down rocks and stepped into soft sand. The salt water stung her cuts. Every few waves reached the hem of her skirt. She held it up and ducked into the cave and kneeled and crawled forward. The light from outside lit her way. Farther in, the ceiling heightened and she stood. The waves churn and splash outside had a hollow sound. She tried and failed to brush wet sand off her clothes. Tim, she said, Tim. The cave was darkening. She stretched out her hands and walked until she reached a dead end. Then waterfalls cascaded down hard, bumpy walls. Water pooled in her cupped hands. Tim, she said one last time, then set, back to rock. Water from wet sand soaked through her skirt onto her underwear. Light outside the cave seemed distant, even as her eyes adjusted to the inner darkness. She fished a handful of agates from a shallow pool where waterfalls gathered. He wasn't there. And if he'd been there and left, the agates would be gone too. She had no more ideas. Despair returned. She clenched her fingers and threw the agates against the wall. They pinged and settled in sand. She threw 2 more handfuls until she didn't feel any others in the pool. She gathered her knees to her chest and rocked back and forth. She hadn't felt this vulnerable since Tim's disappearance. In front of Leah and Jackson, she remained collected. On her drive, she stuck to main roads or highways where she felt as though other drivers could vouch for her. Going off somewhere remote alone had seemed like running away. She wanted to find Tim. She didn't want to run away. She leaned her head against a piece of algae on the rock wall, closed her eyes, and slept. When she woke, the churn and splash of waves sounded close, not hollow. Water hit her toe. She started and stood. Jackson had brought her here when they were newlyweds. The waves reach you but don't cover you, he'd said. They'd entered the cave as the tide was coming out and stayed until it was receding. When the tide touched their toes, as they sat against the back wall, he held her. I wouldn't risk hurting you, he'd said. A wave covered Marilyn's foot. Maybe she wasn't at the deepest point. She placed a hand on the back wall and walked alongside it. When it curved into a sidewall, she turned and walked in the other direction. The ground remained firm. Her sandals never sunk into dry sand. It was easier to trust in a life or death situation than in daily life, Marilyn thought. Of course, Jackson didn't want her pulled out by the tide, and if the ocean had pulled her away, he'd have gone too. Everyone valued staying alive. But in daily life, everyone valued different things most. If she moved back to the wave and no longer saw the ocean from the kitchen window, that lack would hurt her every day. If she moved back to the wave and had to calculate their debts, especially without pay, that would hurt her too. As Jackson valued neither ocean views nor being debt-free, he wouldn't understand. Better to drown quickly than slowly, better not to live there than to live in daily pain. The wall curved on the other side. A wave splashed over her ankle. The ceiling sloped down so she couldn't see outside the expanse of the sea. She sucked in her breath. This is the ocean, she thought. Jackson and I were here 15 years ago. Who knows what has changed? Maybe she could swim out. If she jumped in with an outgoing wave, she might make it past the cave's opening. As she removed her sandals, blouse, and skirt, she imagined walking into the office, wet and almost naked, while a regular joked with Jackson at the desk. She pushed away the image and, shivering, stepped toward the ice-cold water. Waves hit her calves and knees. Shell shards pierced her skin. When waves splashed against her chest, she felt for a large one to ride out on. One bumped her chin. On its way out, she went with it, frantically swimming, hoping not to surface until she ran out of breath or another wave forced her in. The push of a wave came first, much sooner than expected. She raised herself, hoping to see sky. Instead, she glimpsed something open and dark before her head hit the top of the cave and the wave pushed her back. She braced her arms against rocks so the water's impact wouldn't crush her. She crumpled to sand and stood to avoid swallowing salt water. A wave hit her thigh. Her head throbbed. The next wave reached Marilyn's waist. Maybe this happened to Tim, she thought. Him trapped here paralyzed her. He would have screamed and clawed at the back wall before the waves grabbed him. If that had happened, she wanted to join him. She wanted her body floating somewhere in the same water as his. It's not time to give up, she reminded herself. The agates were here. No one knew where he was. A wave slapped her shoulder. The water's coldness tightened her chest. She backed against the cave wall, turned, and climbed. Never turn your back on the ocean, she told Tim. It's unpredictable. Don't trust it. She slipped and fell into water. The current pulled at her. She grabbed sand. She stood and climbed another part of the wall in a corner. This one had a tiny natural ledge to hold and step on. She curled there in a high crevice. For extra support, she pushed her hands against the ceiling. How long could she squat in a couple inches of rock? She closed her eyes. The waves squished, gurgled, and crashed. She didn't want to see the proximity of the water. She had no desire to die, but if she had to, hitting her head on a rock and floating out to sea wouldn't be a bad way to go. Drowning while conscious seemed less pleasant. She readjusted her hands to push against the walls and thought of her mom and dad. Her mom would be canning overflow from her garden during these weeks of summer, mostly at night to avoid heat. Come late September, she'd arrive at the wave with 24 jars as presents. I don't know why you don't have a garden, she'd say. You have enough room. Marilyn would remind her that the salt and wind hindered the growing of vegetables. Her mother had seen Micah's garden and thought she knew better. He's lived on the coast all his life, Marilyn had told her. He knows how to deal with the weather. You're going to live here over half your life, her mom had said. I've mastered flowers, Marilyn said. Flowers won't feed you in winter, her mom said. A couple years ago, she and her dad woke 2 hours before dawn to go fishing. The kitchen smelled like tomato sauce from her mom's canning the night before. They hiked to the Yaquino River and sat on a large rock above it. Leaves rustled in the chilly early morning air. She offered a corner suite at the wave if her parents wanted to live nearby when they were older. Her dad shook his head. I'd rather sit by this river than the sea, he said. But when you're less mobile, she said, maybe in 10 or 15 years. Her dad shook his head again. The rising sun sent rays of light through the branches. He shielded his eyes with his arm. People who live by the ocean are romantics, he said. They want to live by something they can imagine, but never experience. Like Jackson, Marilyn asked. Like Aunt Pearl. Her dad removed his arm and recast the line. Like you, he said. A scene rose of her, Jackson, Leah, and Micah playing Yahtzee in the Waves Lounge. A cold drizzle fell through the darkness outside. They all wore thick sweaters so they could keep the heat low. Jackson mimicked the stuttering of an old man who stayed at the wave for a week each fall, using up boxes of wood and stinking of body odor. He broke character after he got Marilyn to laugh. It was a weekday early last November, Marilyn remembered, right before Micah drowned, right before the busyness of the holidays, right before Jackson's proposal to build the new units. For some reason, after that night, everything went to hell. Marilyn pushed the ceiling again and opened her eyes. The cave was dark, water slushed nearby. She stretched down with her toe to touch it, but couldn't reach. Perhaps the tide had turned. She periodically hung her leg off the crevice. When not even her toes felt a splash for minutes at a time, she stepped down. Her feet sunk into wet sand. Her thighs spasmed, her legs clapped. She sat in inches of water. A wave splashed to her waist. Shouldn't I feel colder? She thought, isn't the water cold? She felt the urge to doze. She leaned her head against algae, closed her eyes, and opened them. I should sleep at home, she told herself. A seagull squawked near the cave's entrance. With effort, she rose. Marilyn remembered trying and failing to wade out, the waves too high near the entrance. She remembered walking from the cave, an occasional wave hitting her waist, her weak body wobbling against the water's impact and suction. She remembered seeing the stars and thinking, I must have missed the sunset. She didn't remember walking on the grass above the rocks or sitting on the bench in front of the wave. She didn't remember her phrases to Clara, or Clara walking her to the office past the stare of a guest who was loading firewood from the box to his arms. She didn't remember Jackson saying he didn't need to take her to the hospital. If she's not better in the morning, I will, he said. She's just cold. She's more than cold, Clara said, but it might be faster to care for her here. Upstairs, Clara took off Marilyn's bra and underwear and wrapped her in blankets on Tim's bed. She told Jackson to lie next to his wife for the body heat. When Jackson hesitated, Clara cursed. What's wrong with you, she said. She asked for a towel and stocking cap. Jackson brought them, and after drying Marilyn's hair with the towel as much as possible, Clara secured the cap on Marilyn's head. She heated up water, poured it into water bottles, and placed the bottles underneath Marilyn's armpits and next to her legs. After Clara left, Jackson repeated this procedure twice as Clara had instructed. Marilyn mumbled off and on. While the third round of bottles cooled, he lay next to her, one arm across her chest. He had to lie close to fit on Tim's twin bed. He eased his body onto hers, careful not to let any of the weight from the cast drop on her. She was warm, he thought. That meant she wasn't dead. Of course she wasn't dead. Why would he think that? She'd fallen into a pool of seawater, he surmised from her sandiness and scent. But then why was she so incoherent? Through the contact, his body was warming. Her chest rose and fell against his, her even breath moist against his face. At least she was sleeping peacefully now. Images of them making love flashed through his mind. He scooted off her, rolled off the bed, and applied 2 more hot water bottle cycles. He tightened the blankets, mummy-like around her, and placed 1 more blanket on top. For the final hours of the night, he dozed in a chair by the window, from which, unknown to him, Tim had escaped.
Yay! One of my favorite passages, and it had me holding my breath the whole time. I thought that was just a really intense scene. So let's just start off with what inspired you to write the book and how it came to life.
Okay, so a long time ago in a city far away, no, back in 2008, when I was living in Baltimore, I wrote this very short story about a boy gathering agates, and one of his friends, and his parents owned a motel, and one of his friends who stayed at the motel had left to serve in a war. And so I wrote that. It was just a few pages. And then a few months later, I remember I was at Starbucks, because I used to go there before there was internet at Starbucks to leave my apartment. And I just remember sitting there and I think I had read some stuff about the Beach Bill in the interim, and just like having the idea come to me about these 5 characters. And I just wrote out the plot, like 10 pages by hand. And then before I started my MFA, I wrote kind of like 80% of a draft, I would say. And then I returned and wrote it from scratch in like 2013, and revised it with a group in Colorado where I was living at the time. And as far as inspiration, like the Beach Bill inspired it. My family used to go to the Central Oregon coast for a week when I was a kid, so that setting inspired it. When I look at the characters after I wrote it, I just see like small things from my life that inspired it. Like in Baltimore, I knew a lady, I was friends with a Jewish lady, and when her dad died, I went and said Shiva with her, and I think like Leah's Jewish, and I learned a lot from her for that. Or just things like that, but none of it, how fiction is. It's like things from your life, but ordered and imagined in different ways, plus other things. Yeah.
Made better, made more interesting, right? So it's so interesting that you went to vacation on the Oregon coast, and that was part of it, because that was like kind of how my settings got inspired too, like the places that you go on vacation with your friends and with your family when you're little.
Yeah.
They kind of have this sort of magical cast to them almost. So let's talk about the coast a little bit and the setting itself. Like I thought the setting was just so vividly rendered. And like I said, I'd never been there to Oregon coast. I mean, I've gotten up to San Francisco, maybe is the closest I've gotten. So I kind of had that as a frame of reference, but like it really felt vividly imagined to me. And how does the setting kind of relate to the characters and their problems and their lives? And not just Marilyn, but Marilyn and Leah, but we got Elliot and Jackson and Tim too. They all sort of seem to have a different kind of relationship to the coast, but all of them definitely seem to have set points of view and sets of almost like their problems. A lot of like the plot of it comes just from being on the coast. So yeah, how how does the coast itself influence the book?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so fun. Like, one of the reasons I thought about you is like our coastal connection and going there as a kid. So, but yeah, I guess when I first started writing fiction, there was this question that I'm not sure where it was from, but it was like, into whose life has this trouble come, is like something that they would have us ask. And it kind of like made you think about the characters and their background and their age and where they lived and just their job and everything. And so, you know, it's just, for me, the setting's always an integral part of the person, maybe more than some writers. And I really feel like people are influenced by their environment, where they live. And so, yeah, it was a huge aspect of the plot, like you said. And Marilyn and Leah are interesting because they moved there when they were in their late 20s, whereas Jackson and Tim have always lived there. And then Elliot grew up right near the coast, in Washington, and then has lived there most of his life. So they all have different perspectives on how long they've been there and how they view it. But it definitely shapes their wants and desires. And yeah.
So let's I want to talk about point of view a little bit. I feel like you don't see this sort of omniscient point of view very much, or I haven't lately. And this book tends to like dip into each of the main characters' heads. And I thought like the overall effect for me was really interesting, because I felt like I really got a peek into this, not only the characters themselves, but that getting into each of their heads gave me like a feel of like the whole community set in this time and place. So how did you decide to structure the book and the point of view?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. And I knew that I wanted it to be about these 5 characters. And like when I wrote out the plot, I didn't know exactly what point of view it was in. And then in grad school, I wrote my short novel, Treeline, that was like omniscient in going into different points of view in a community. It was the 1830s Prince Edward Island. But and then when I started rewriting this one, I was like, I'm going to do something different. And so I was like, I'm going to do like it from Leah's point of view, and then she'll like observe everyone. And I tried that, but it just wasn't working for me. And I just am really drawn in novels, not in short stories, but to the like third person omniscience, and to writing about communities and moving between the people in those communities. And I noticed, and I didn't even notice when I was first writing, but like it is those 5 characters, but then it jumps into like it'll go to the bartender's perspective sometimes,
yeah.
or like more minor characters briefly. And I think it's just like kind of part of that omniscience, where like once you're in the mode of being, you go into the character and then you go above the character. And I think that section I read kind of had a little bit of that, where I'm like, unknown to him, Tim had escaped or whatever. Like the reader knows Tim had escaped through that window, but I don't know. It's just like an easy way to jump around to different points of view, the main characters and the minor characters, and to create that sense of community like you talk about. And I'm really drawn to it. And I do think it's kind of like old fashioned in some ways. So I was trying to work on another like short novel, and I put it in first person. I was like, I'm gonna do first person this time. And then I kept like jumping into third person, and like they're gonna want to know what this person says. I don't know. I just really like having different perspectives, and I'm drawn to that. So
That's so funny. I'm like the exact opposite. Like I'm gonna try third person this time, and then it like slips back into first. And I'm like incapable of writing in third omniscience. So interesting though. But like you mentioned, like you thought maybe it was like slightly old fashioned or something, but this is also a historical novel. So set in 1967, which I thought was really well done in a way that wasn't that was subtle and not like I don't know, too blatantly obvious, where you're bringing in, you know, bell bottoms and whatnot. But it does like reference the music and references, like sets it definitively in this time and place, but without being over the top about it. Can you talk about sort of why you decided to set it in this point in time, and how the kind of research that you had to do to get the details correct? Because the beach bill and like what the towns like on the Oregon coast were like in the late 60s and that kind of thing?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. And I'm glad that you felt like the time period was there, but in the background, because that's really what I aim for when I write historical fiction, because it's like historical literary fiction. I really want it to be about the characters and the plot and the setting and the language, and not necessarily have people think about it being too much in the past, but I want it to be accurate toward the past. So I'm glad that came through. I think with the beach bill, I mean, I knew it was always going to be set then, and I started reading about the beach bill, and I started reading about the time period, and I read a lot like in between the first draft and like my later draft about it. And then I kind of like, I like to read a lot about the time period and then forget about it and like let it come up subconsciously when I'm writing, because if I don't do that, then I'll just like write about history, and that's, like I want it to be in the background, like you said. So, and then after I wrote my second draft, I went back and did like fact checking for certain things, and I also went on Multnomah County website through the Oregonian newspaper in Oregon, and like would read the archives and look at the ads in the time period and just like try to get myself like in that framework. And then I'd write notes in revision, like would they do this in this time period or that kind of thing, or like did this exist? But I tried not to be a perfectionist about it, because like I know, for example, like Leah and Marilyn go door to door for the beach bill, and they're trying to get people to write letters. So I didn't find anywhere that people actually did that. I know there were 30,000 letters that were written to the Oregon legislature that people wanted the beach bill to be passed. But they usually came from like individuals or groups or students. And I didn't know of anyone going door to door, but it worked really well for the story because both of them needed to travel at this time in their life. And so I was like, they're just going to do this. And if it's not, maybe someone did that, So I tried not to be too perfectionist about it. And I'm sure there's like a couple factual errors, and people who were alive then will point them out to me, and that's fine.
Haters gonna hate. But yeah, I think that's the way to go. Like it did sort of seem to me like the setting was there and the time frame was there, but yeah, what came to the forefront was the characters themselves and their relationships. So you talked a little bit about Marilyn and Leah and how they go out like door to door on the beach bill. Like one of my favorite things about the book was their relationship and their friendship. I know part of like a huge part of the story is Marilyn and Jackson, and how their relationship is a little bit kind of cracking and crumbling at this point for various reasons. But Marilyn and Leah, I thought were really interesting. Can you sort of maybe talk a little bit about their friendship and how they like rely on each other, and whether the setting kind of pulls into this? Like, does their sort of love of the place bind them together, and like what is it that compelling these two characters in their friendship?
I really liked their friendship too. So I like, that was funny. When you're a writer, you're like, you write things, but then it kind of is inspired too. So you can be like, oh, I like that. That happened. Nice. But yeah, I mean, I've been able to have good female friendships as an adult with you and others. And so I think I naturally write about that. And Leah, so for most people who haven't read it yet, because some of the differences between them are, well, Leah's like Jewish. She grew up in a logging camp with her father in Washington, and she started a bakery when she was 18 in Portland. Then she married Micah and moved to the coast. She's more outgoing than Maryland, more of a people person, kind of more of a risk taker, and Maryland is less of a risk taker. She lived in a small town, moved to the coast for marriage, and but they get along really well. I think, like I said earlier, they both moved there when they were in their late 20s, so they have that commonality. and their love of the coast, and they're kind of like outsiders together there in that small town. So I think that really drew them together.
Yeah, I just like the relationship a lot, and then sort of paralleling that, like there's like Tim and Elliot form this kind of strange friendship. We talked about Elliot much, but he's kind of the grumpy former lighthouse keeper who is very much opposed to the beach bill.
Yeah.
It's like there's lots of sort of parallel and interesting relationships going on in there. So let's see. The last like biggest question I have is about the title and how you came across it, because as I was reading, I found the title like sticking in my mind, and I was like, oh yeah, I don't know, it just like kind of stuck with me. And you know, I have multiple degrees in English, and I still didn't realize that it came from a Robert Frost poem until a little bit later. But, and then I looked up the poem and I read it, and I was like, oh, that makes total sense. So I just wondered how you came to the title, and how it informs the book, how they talk to each other.
Yeah. Thanks for asking. I was happy to end up with that title. For a while I had Handfuls of Darkness, which is kind of like an emo title. Like,
Emo, yeah.
But it comes from a Robert Bly poem, Snowfall in the Afternoon, I think. And Elliot really likes Robert Bly, the lighthouse keeper. And originally, like, there's a scene that started inspired by that poem. So I had it for a while, but I was like, I knew it was a placeholder, and I would always look for things. And I came across that when I was rewriting it in an anthology of poems. And I just thought, like, on a surface level, it works really well. Like, people on the sand, there's 5 people on the sand. And if you think of like the sand is shifting and they're changing, you know, just like on a very elementary level, there's that. But then there's, you know, that poem talks about the people looking out to sea in the poem. And I feel like all of the characters, kind of like in a section I read, there's some that are more practical than others, but all of them, you know, Marilyn's dad pointed out that like they were kind of dreamers in a way. And like Marilyn, she's very practical in some ways, but she wants this relationship that is uncommon for that time period. And Jackson wants he wants to expand the motel. Elliot has his own personal lighthouse, which actually that was inspired by, there is a personal lighthouse there on the coast that someone has. A much nicer guy owned it than Elliot. And let's see, Leah has started her own business, and Tim, he writes poetry. So they're all kind of like, so the poem talks about them looking out to sea, and they can't look very far, but they keep looking. And so I felt like on a deeper level that represented all of the main characters as well. So
yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I felt the same way when I read it. I was like, oh yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly what they're doing and who they are. And like, I think it was Marilyn's dad in the passage that you read said that people who live by the ocean are romantics. And like, I think all of the characters have a little bit of that inside themselves, even though like they are also, you know, very practical and, you know, competent at living in the world, but they do like to look out to the sea. So let's see, we're almost to the point where we need to take questions, but really quick, I just wanted to ask what's coming up next for you? What else, what other projects do you have in the works?
Well, next I'm focused on like promoting this, I guess, because it's the 55th anniversary of the Beach Bill. So yeah. I'm going to try to plug it as much as possible. And I really think it's like an Oregon and Northwest story, and that everyone will like it, but especially people around here. So I'll do that into the next year. And then last month, I actually just signed a contract with West Virginia University Press to publish a short story collection and so it's coming out next fall. So that's pretty soon. It's set in Colorado. It's about a group of workers. Many of them work at a factory, not all of them, but again, it's like a community. But I think I'm excited to share those stories, and I think it's like strangely timely with all of like, there's more labor talk in the news and stuff right now, so it might work out. But that's what's next. Yeah.
Oh, that's super exciting. Yeah, we're noticing some thematic things that you like to address. And But let's go ahead and take questions if anybody has questions. I think Michael's gonna pop on
Here I am.
and read stuff if anybody has them, or you can just raise your hand if you don't mind being on camera.
Hey, we do have a question. Hi, Rachel from Mihirwan. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. How tricky was it to write about the 60s? How did you get the tiny details right? And what sort of research did you do for that?
Yeah, it's Mahir. Hi, Mahir. Thanks for coming. So I guess, like I said, I read books about the Beach Bill, and I read a book about Tom McCall, who's governor then, and some of the stuff some history books that were going on. I read some stuff about logging, and then I wrote it. And then after I wrote it, I kind of fact checked things as I was going through, and I would write questions in the margins and then go check on things. And also, like I said, I tried to immerse myself in some of the newspapers of the time. And I don't think I got every single detail right, but I think that, one thing I didn't mention is it helped kind of set it in a fictional town, because my parents had talked about, who are here, thanks for coming, talked about that area of the coast in the 60s. They had been there, but I didn't feel like I knew that exact area intimately enough to set it in an actual town then. So I could create a fictional town and use some aspects from that area. And then, it didn't have to be completely correct. And actually, one thing I did is I had a calendar of 1967. And when I was doing research, I was writing down things that were happening throughout the year, like larger things that were happening in the US and the world, and then like things that were happening in Oregon and things that were happening in the characters' lives. So it got kind of detailed. And like the days should be correct. If I say Sunday, October 20th, it should be Sunday, October 20th. That's why I said I had to hold myself back from being a perfectionist. But yeah, those are some methods.
I have a little follow-up question on that.
Yeah.
You're saying you were making the margin notes and then looking up stuff later. Did those ever, when you looked up things, did you ever find out details that changed an element of a scene or the plot or anything like that? You're like, oh wait, that doesn't work, and now I have to do this.
Yeah, yes. I think I kind of like it went both ways, where like I would find out things that had happened, so I'd structure the original plot around it, and then like as I would find out other things, I would kind of pull back. So for example, at the very end, there is a large Vietnam protest going on that I knew the end was going to be set in the fall sometime, and I found out that there was a huge like march on the Capitol in October, and I just decided to set it that weekend because it was kind of like a good backdrop for what was going on in the characters' lives. So that's I guess one example. I'm trying to think of an example of what you said, Michael, with something I found out later and I had to tweak it, which it did happen. And if I think of it, I'll let you know.
Okay, that's cool. Charity Gingrich, landscape always seems important in your work, and I'm curious, do you write best about a specific landscape while in it or away from it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I did write this when I was in Colorado. So I was away, and then since I've been back here home for 5 years, and I did write my collection. It's set in Colorado when I was here. So it's possible that I did it when I was away, but I was also working on something recently set in Portland, and it seemed to be going okay. So I've heard writers say they're one or the other, and I'm not sure exactly what I am, but
Cool. A follow-up comment from me here. Thanks for the answer, Rachel. That must have been quite onerous. I like the idea with the calendar. Good for reader immersion. I like that idea too. I'm gonna steal that idea. Other questions? Feel free to chime in.
jump in. And I know the book came out today, so I know most of you haven't read it, but
Yeah, right. Ryan Volker, do you prefer writing novels or short stories?
So when I started, I was like, I really like not the long form. And then when I went to grad school, like I wrote stories, started writing stories, and I really enjoy them. I think in general, I do like novels. They just take a long time and your brain hurts. And when I started writing short stories, when I moved here, I had like 2 novels that I thought were good that hadn't found a home. And I was like, I can't do this for like 3 to 5 years again. And so I'm just going to write short stories because then they might be able to find a home and people, can enjoy them. So, but I do think in general, even the short stories that are coming out this next year, they're all linked together. So I do like kind of that community and the novel type structure, I think best. Yeah.
It seems like a good compromise, having the linked short story collection.
Yeah,
you can
exactly.
publish along the way if you want to, and then have that satisfaction of the whole thing coming together. Patricia Sellinger, to everyone. For Rachel and Heather, as you both write about your respective coasts, how does the setting of the ocean influence your writing and characters? A life force, nature, etc.? Oh, cool question.
You should go
ahead,
first.
Heather.
It's your release day. You should go. There's time left. I'll talk about mine.
Let's see, life force. So I kind of think of the ocean as like it's obviously a representation of a lot of things. It's actually a physical entity, and there's a lot going on there, first of all, but also like kind of a representation of the unconscious. So I guess that like a lot of things that aren't spoken or that are known but not on a spoken level. So I thought about that when I was writing. That's a big part of what the ocean represents to me figuratively.
Yeah, the ocean is it's huge in my stuff too, in a way. Well, like my coast is really different from Rachel's coast. So I'm writing about a barrier island. So for me, like the barrier island is like, it's this little teeny strip of sand, and the ocean is there. So everything's constantly kind of in motion, and I kind of tend to lean on that heavily for the sake of the metaphor of the characters' lives being in flux and things not staying in one place. And sometimes maybe characters are looking for stability and things are not working out that way. So and then the ocean itself, like Rachel said, like it's loaded with all kinds of metaphorical heft that you can do with it, but also all the super cool like scientific parts of it, which I love to kind of research and use the sciencey stuff too. Like I think it's so interesting, all the stuff that you could pull into it.
Yeah. And the tide pools in the Oregon coast or something I mentioned in this reading, and they're amazing. And the rock formations there and the caves and the agates.
Yeah, I love the way the agates came into this book. I didn't even know anything about agates, but I was like, I ended up like researching them and looking into it. I was like, that's so cool. I think it's one of the things that kind of like nailed the setting in for me. Like that's something I would never have thought of to write about, but once you read about it, you're like, oh yeah, that's definitely part of that setting of that coast.
Not a question, but Cassia wanted to say, congratulations on Pub Day, Rachel. My copy arrived today. I can't wait to read it.
Thank you, Cassia. So good. So good to see you. My first thing that was ever published was through the Birch at Columbia, where Cassia went, and it was we lived in Russia together for a year, well, different cities, and I wrote about my experience there, and she got it put in there. So. Known her a while.
Oh, that's so cool.
She's a great writer. She actually she was writing a lot more than I was when we were in Russia, and she inspired me to get back into it.
So what's your writing routine? What's your writing routine like? And what's your ideal writing routine versus your real life one?
Oh, well, when I was writing this book, I was working at a publishing company in Colorado, and I would try to write like 500 words on Saturday and Sunday morning. And that's how I wrote the second draft of this book. And then over a couple years, and then revised it. But it just depends like what's going on. Now, like I have another full-time job, but before this I had like freelance and a part-time job. So sometimes I would write like not on weekends, which is nice. But yeah, I like to write in the mornings. Yeah. How about you?
That's good to hear. Like it's nice to hear someone writing 500 words every couple days. That's kind of my current process too. I get one day this week because the kids are off school Thursday and Friday, so like I usually have the babies in preschool 3 mornings a week, and I just like I try to drop them off and like hunker down and like do nothing else. Like you can't go home and do laundry, you have to like sit down and write, like crank out what I can, but like that's about it. It's not
that's impressive.
Not ideal, but it's making progress, like bird by bird, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean it adds up if you're in it for the long haul.
Yeah, exactly. And it is like eyes on the prize, right? Like focus on the long haul and like keep chiseling away at it.
Ryan Volker wants to know, are you currently or have you ever participated in NaNoWriMo?
So like I had a roommate in college who did it, and it was really impressive, but I haven't done it exactly. A couple years ago, I was in a class through literary arts called Writing a Novel in 8 Weeks. And it was during NaNoWriMo, and no one was actually writing the novel, I don't think, in 8 weeks, but it encouraged us to kind of free ourselves and write more and not edit ourselves as much. And I did during November write a lot, but not officially participated. How about you?
No, I've never done it. I could probably use that. Like I have the slow writer. Like I'm a really slow writer, and I like read recursively and write, like go back and read and then write a little more and go back and read and write a little more, and I'm like super slow about it. And so NaNoWriMo like severely intimidates me. I'm like, how would I just like sit down and like just sit down and write stuff? Plus I feel like I would have to have a plot in mind, and I haven't like I was so interested when you were talking about how you laid the plot out, like 10 pages of the plot, and like I've never done that before successfully. And that's something like I keep getting in my head, like I really want to try that. Like I want to have like a plot, and here's what I need to hit, and I have to do this scene and this scene and this scene, and I've never been able to do that before. I guess like when I think about it, like in a short story, I kind of do a little bit more, but like you said, like the short stories are just kind of like they make you feel good because you can complete it and like complete it and have it done, which I thought was kind of what I was doing, because I didn't want to do a novel either, and then it turned into a novel. But yeah, NaNoWriMo, I mean, sometime I should probably try it and like see what happens. But
are you doing it, Ryan? He's gonna reply. Oh, nice. Congratulations. Yeah, good luck. I think it is good for that. And for people who don't know, I don't think my parents know, is like, so people try to write a novel in November. So like by writing 1,000 words a day or something like that. Yeah. So I think it is good for like just kind of, if you're stuck, letting things flow, and it's all garbage. But I mean, at least you got it out there, and then you can revise or whatever.
I agree with Kasia that it should be a different month of the year. It's
November.
Like 4 days that you're got for Thanksgiving or something, and it's busy time.
So what's your favorite part of the process? Do you like drafting best or revising or something else?
I think that we've talked about this, Heather, that like we used to be like, we're going, as younger writers, like we just like drafting and like getting stories out there. But then like as we wrote for years and years, then it was like you just saw how much you can do in revision, and it makes you so excited to revise things. So I think that's still where I think that was where when we left grad school where we're at, and I'm still kind of like that. Like I like having the new ideas and getting it out there, but then I really like to see, you know, what happens in revision.
Yeah, I think it's exciting to it's both good. Like it's like the getting an idea and getting it out there is like all like fizzy and sparkly and fresh, but then like getting into it in revision and like being able to like really hone it and make it like something really good. It's like that's also really fun and painful sometimes, but like really fun. Like I'm trying to kind of deep into revision now, and so I'm in that mindset. Like, oh, this is bad. Here's how, like, maybe I can make this good if I do this and this. And like actually seeing it transform is also pretty validating.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Sometimes like whatever you're on, you kind of want to be on the opposite.
Yeah. I can see that.
So how long did this book take overall? Like you said, you like seemed like you went through drafts and stuff.
I think like in Colorado, when I was writing the second draft, it was like 2 years of revision, 1 year, or 2 years of writing steadily, 1 year of revision. So like 3 years. And then
it's not bad.
I still think I cut like 5,000 words since then, you know, as I was like sending it out, I was like, need to cut some more words. But yeah, it wasn't terrible.
That's not too bad. It's pretty typical.
But I mean, the idea came like, you know, a long time ago. And then, so I think it, you know, sometimes when you're not working on it, your mind is just working on it, or when I'm just reading books about the 60s or Oregon. So that 3 years doesn't count some of that.
Right. Yeah. I think there's so much that goes on when you're not actually writing that is all part of the writing, like stuff like, going on in the back of your head that ends up being really integral to what you needed to do. Like, it's just, I don't know, it's interesting how the whole long drawn out process works sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of the long process, we're going to talk about the publishing process and if you got COVIDed any.
COVIDed?
Like
just like that it changed, like how I don't think that I did. I've worked kind of in publishing or publishing adjacent for like 11 or 12 years, so I kind of knew what to expect, and that was good. For this book, I went through a hybrid press, which is one where it's through Belt Publishing in Cleveland. They have a hybrid imprint called Paraffin. And so I'm paying some of the upfront costs, but then I get like 80% of the profit. So it's a little bit different. My one from West Virginia University Press, they're going to pay all of the upfront costs, but I only get 15% of the profit. So, but it was nice. I kind of like approached them about a year ago, and then they started in production in the spring. And it was pretty much a straight shot. Yeah, there was no
bumps.
And like I said, it was nice knowing kind of like the copy editing, the layout, the cover, and like just the steps, because I'd worked on the back end.
Yeah, that's definitely a perk to that, because I was kind of going into that like blind, and I didn't know how the rest of that process worked. I get asked like questions about the cover, and like, I don't know, I didn't have anything to do with that. I don't know, man.
So yeah, well, I think we're almost
closing out. We're like 1 more minute left. I don't know if anyone has any any last minute questions.
I see that, but everyone that I know out there, I just like really appreciate you coming, and I see you, and I appreciate people I don't know coming, and hey Sarah, it's really good to see you. So yeah, it means a lot to me, and thank you, Heather, so much for your great questions, and Michael for providing the space. So I can give it back to Michael.
All right, absolutely. Yeah, thank you guys. It was really great reading and talk. Great questions. I put the link there in the chat one last time for you to go and head on over to Annie Bloom's website and pick up both of these authors' books. Rachel will come in to sign them if you have requests. And I'll let you know that this has been recorded and it'll be up on our YouTube channel probably later tonight. So if you have friends who aren't able to make it, let them know that they can go there and watch it later. And thank you very much. We hope to see you at another reading again some other time.
Thank
Good night,
you.
everyone.
Bye.